Thank you, Rabbi. I'm excited to be here and to present a little bit about my grandfather to everybody. So I'll just say my background is not in art history or the history of photography, but since I have the personal connection and since I recently attended the opening of the exhibit about his work in Paris, I felt like this would be a good chance to bring back a little bit to everybody. Thanks for coming to this, especially cousins and Uncle Yossi is here from Israel. So it's quite exciting to say a little bit about my grandfather. About his name, he did, for his photographic work, he did choose the pen name or the name Moï Ver, which was an abbreviation of his birth name, Moises or Moshe Vorobeichik. So he took the first three letters of his first name and the first three letters of his last name and made something catchy and memorable out of it, basically when he moved to Paris. So I chose the title Moï Ver, c'est mon grand-père, because it rhymes, and of course it means Moï Ver, that's my grandpa. I will, let's see, on my, okay, this is the amazing book. This is the cover of the book that was produced for the exhibit. It's currently available in French only, but it's quite lovely to see this big coffee table sized catalog of the exhibit on display at the Pompidou for 42 euros. Like, it's quite a nice souvenir of the exhibit. On my title page, I tried to duplicate that font that they use for Moï Ver on the catalog book. This is a picture of my grandfather as I knew him. He's probably in his 60s or 70s there. But you know, he was a kindly and interesting fellow to talk to. I knew him on numerous trips to Israel to visit him, and that's where he spent perhaps the last 60 years of his life. But I want to do this chronologically, so I'll just say that walking through the Paris metro and seeing posters for his work at the Pompidou was extremely, extremely exciting for me. You know, he in his lifetime would never have imagined such an exhibit. Of course, the Pompidou didn't exist yet when he lived in Paris briefly, but he would never have imagined such a large exhibit of his work. It was very exciting for me to be there and to see this. This is a picture showing my brother and myself and two of our cousins in Paris at the exhibit. It wasn't just the four of us. There were about 15 people who came into Paris, cousins and assorted relatives for the exhibit. It was all very exciting. And essentially, the exhibit was all organized by my Uncle Yossi, who's here on the Zoom. He may say a few words later, I'm sure. Okay, going back, Moshe, my grandfather, was born in 1904. And even the place of his birth has a bit of confusion to it. When there was an exhibit organized in Vilnius by the art gallery there, they gave his birthplace as Vilnius. Not strictly accurate. What he told me was that he was born in Lebedevo, which is a little town now in Belarus. It would have been the Russian Empire at the time. I say he was born in Lebedevo. It's not too far from Minsk. And this picture shows him as a young man, probably, I'm thinking he's around age 20 or so in this picture. Very handsome, standing tall at the back of the family portrait. I don't know if you see, I do not think you see my my cursor. You can let me know if you do or don't. But yes, okay. Yeah. So on the left is his father, my great-grandfather Shlomo. Toward the right is his mother, my great-grandmother Shifra. He was one of 4 siblings. So these are Bluma, Dora, and little Benny. If I don't get back to them later, remind me to say what all happened to them later in the war. Okay. Moshe was born into this family that was Jewish, of course, but not particularly religious, I would say. In my imagination, the family would have belonged to an Orthodox synagogue, but Moshe certainly was pursuing his own course. He was interested in Judaism, but he was very much drawn to the modern world. So, in terms of what influenced his art and his photography, I would say it's like an early 20th century desire to be, part of this new modern enterprise of art. I think his attitudes toward Judaism were a bit mixed, and we'll see some examples later on. Moshe went to a high school that was actually a Hebrew high school. So he learned Hebrew and Yiddish and other Judaic topics in high school, and did very well in them. I've seen his report card. It's very solid in all those subjects, plus other subjects like Polish and mathematics and so on. After high school, he attended the university in Vilna called Stefan Batory. I should have said his family, although he was born in Lebedevo, the family moved to Vilna, and that is where he grew up. He attended Stefan Batory. He had classes in art and architecture. He was certainly interested in those more artistic subjects. Meanwhile, his father Shlomo wrote letters back and forth to the United States with his siblings, Shlomo's siblings, that had already immigrated to the US. So Shlomo was one of 8 siblings. One of them was Joe, that he mostly wrote letters with. Joe's granddaughter is Rachel here on this call. Others of those siblings were Anna or Annie, and a great-granddaughter of Annie is here on this call as well. So just thank you for being here. The content of Shlomo's letters to Joe were very interesting, and that would be a whole separate topic. But occasionally he would ask for financial help from his brother that had already immigrated to the US and that was working there as a doctor in Providence. The result of asking for money was that some money came together for Moshe to attend the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus was certainly the preeminent art school in Germany in those years. And this picture shows Moshe's ID card for the Bauhaus. It's got his name in German, Moshe Vorobeichik, and shows him to be a very handsome 22-year-old, I would say, at this point. At the Bauhaus, he would have taken classes from and been exposed to well-known artists by Paul Klee, Kandinsky, Albers, Molinage, and many others. Let's see. Rabbi Mara is calling. I don't know if she's trying to log into the Zoom or not. So Moshe had a what seemed like a wonderful experience at the Bauhaus school. Lots of interesting things happened there, but he arrived in 1927 and left in 1929, 2 years later. And our family had lots of questions about why did he enroll and then leave 2 years later to go to Paris. And the family lore, pretty well supported, is that he had a girlfriend, maybe fiance, who knows, but let's say a girlfriend at the time, and that somehow she became pregnant and they moved to Paris together. What we understand as a family is that this was a non-Jewish girlfriend, because if it had been a Jewish girlfriend, he would have married her, brought her home to the family, etc. We don't know about that family, but we know indirectly about them. They're mentioned in some letters. His sister went to Paris to visit them to see how things were going. So it's clear that this was the case, but I don't know their names, for example, or have any photographs of his girlfriend and daughter in Paris. But in Paris, Moshe got busy taking classes at what was called the École Photo Ciné, so a school of photography and cinematography. He lived in Montrouge with his girlfriend and child, and he developed this technique called photomontage. So he was mainly working in photography, but not just any photography. It was quite groundbreaking at the time, and he would take multiple pictures and then superimpose the negatives one on another when he developed the film. So this was what he called photomontage, and he used it in preparing pictures for a book that was published in 1931. So he moved to Paris in 1929, and by 1931, he published this book called Paris. It wasn't the only photographic book about Paris. We saw several others in the exhibit at the Pompidou, but this one was interesting, and like I said, possibly groundbreaking, because, for example, in this image on the right, he's got pictures of an advertising kiosk in Paris, and superimposed with some city lights and so on. On the cover of the book, similarly, he's got a photo montage of looks like chimneys with smoke, and he's got this certainly modern pictures of Paris. If I said daughter, that was incorrect. I meant to say that he had a girlfriend and son in Paris in 1929. Here's a second book that was published in 1931. This one was published in multiple languages. It was republished a couple of years ago, and I have a picture, I have the book with me. So it has an English side and a Yiddish side. And in English, the book was called The Ghetto Lane in Vilna. In German, the name was Ein Ghetto im Osten, meaning a ghetto in the East. So this was all about Vilna. So besides living in Paris with this little family, he also took family trips back to Vilna to visit his parents and siblings. While in Vilna, he found his way to the old Jewish quarter and took these really quite interesting pictures and had them as well published, as I said, in this book called The Ghetto Lane in Vilna in 1931. To me, what's interesting about these pictures are that they are all about Jewish life in Vilna pre-war, but two, he's a little distant from these people. I think that for the most part, he didn't ask them whether he could take their pictures, but rather he's taking a picture from a distance. He's maybe hidden behind a doorway or something. In some cases, he's overhead and looking down, like on the cover picture. What he thinks of this Jewish ghetto in Vilna, and of course, ghetto meant something different during World War II. In 1931, the word ghetto was used, and it simply meant the Jewish quarter, or the Jewish quarter of Vilna. Besides his attitude toward these people that he was photographing, I think it's interesting that the pictures survive as a look into a vanished past that, after the war was completely obliterated. During the war was completely obliterated. Here's another image from the ghetto lane in Vilna. The pictures show elderly people, men, women. There's one showing children that's particularly charming. So this shows the children, and it's very artistically framed in the archway of the door. My brother Dan, who's on this call, wrote an article about visiting Vilna and viewing the city through through the lens of his grandfather. I think he might maybe put in the chat a link to the article that he wrote, because it's quite worth reading, I think. So 1931 was very busy. He started using the name Moï Ver for his art. He published the book about Paris. He published The Ghetto Lane in Vilna, but that's not all that happened in 1931. In 1931, he also met this lovely lady who was eventually our grandmother, Granny Rose, Rose or Róża in Polish. He met Róża under interesting circumstances. He had a job of some sort to take photographs for, I think, a magazine about Jewish summer camps or Jewish youth in Poland, and he traveled to this lake venue east of Warsaw called Lake Naroż. So Lake Naroż you can find online. It's still a beautiful lake and kind of a national park. But of course, for our family history, it's where our grandparents met. Now, of course, it's complicated because he's still living in Paris with his girlfriend and son, but now he's meeting Granny Rose. He took this picture of her, and she looks very enticing. She's in the hay or something. It's just quite a lovely picture, I think, and we have it on our wall here at home. There was about Rose, they stayed in touch, and there's more to that story. They wrote letters where he invited her to come to Paris, and she said, "Oh, but I couldn't possibly. What about your little family there?" So she already knew about his living arrangements, and I guess put up with it, was aware of it. He went back to Paris and worked on this third work for publication called Si Contre. The title Si Contre meant something like in juxtaposition or something like that, in contrast, let's say. In the 1930s, that book was never published because of problems that he had with the publisher, with increasing anti-Semitism in Germany. There were complications related to copyright, perhaps. But for whatever reasons, that book was not published until much, much later, in fact. Si Contre was eventually published, but this is the series of pictures that he prepared for it. Now, I'll draw your attention to the image in the center. It's a young woman with freckles, and that young woman was his sister, Dora, whom you saw earlier in this presentation. Here is a picture, a close-up of the picture of Dora. Not the best image, but one that I wanted to show you. Dora happily survived the war, and she ended up in Tel Aviv, as he did. And this is a picture of Dora with her Israeli husband. She had a husband in Vilna who perished in the war, but she came out of the war, made it to Israel, remarried, and had 2 sons from her first marriage and one from her second marriage. So that's a little bit about Dora's story. Back to Moshe and Rose. They made a date together, and that date was to meet in 1932 in Vienna. Why Vienna? I assume it was some kind of waypoint on some travel that he had. He must have had some job that was going to take him either to Vienna or through Vienna to Palestine. But they made a date to meet in Vienna. They met at a little hotel there. And the result of that was that in 1933, my mother was born. And this is a picture that I love very much. My mother is the little infant in the center of the picture. My mother used to call this picture the Adoration of the Magi, because it looks like three men surrounding a little child. And what we see here is Granny Rose holding her child, and Moshe in the background. And for the life of me, I don't remember seeing very many pictures of them together. They certainly never had a household together or an address. They wrote to each other back and forth, but they never really lived together. As far as whether they were married, it's complicated. I know there was eventually a divorce because there had to be, but how exactly this baby came to be, well, I'll just say it had something to do with that get together in Vienna in 1932. Who else is in the picture? There were two other cousins. These were first cousins of my Granny Rose, cousin Adek and Max. And Max survived the war and ended up in Australia. Adek perished in the war, but his wife, his later wife, not seen in this picture, his later wife survived with an infant son, and they too moved to Australia. And that infant son is my cousin Roland, who I invited to this Zoom, but he's traveling and couldn't make it. But this is a lovely picture showing everyone together: Moshe, Rose, Lily, my mother, and two cousins. Come 1934, I'll just go back for a moment. Come 1934, Moshe settled fairly permanently in Palestine. 1934 is pre-war, so that's how he survived the war. He wasn't anywhere near Europe. At this point, with settling in Palestine, he invited Rose to bring Lily to Palestine, which she did briefly in 1934. They visited. Rose decided Palestine was not to her liking at all. Dusty hinterland, no offense to Yossi, but she was having none of it. She would not stay in this dusty place with camels, and headed back to the presumed safety of Warsaw, the big city life. It didn't go very well, but my mother and grandmother did survive the war. And eventually they too, post-war, arrived in Palestine. I believe they had help from Moshe, who probably would have had to sponsor them in some way. Maybe he said this was his wife and child. Maybe they were, in fact, married. But for Moshe, he at this point had long since abandoned his girlfriend and son in Paris. He had certainly left Europe, leaving Rose and Lily to their own devices. And when Lily and Rose arrived in Palestine, this would be about 1946 or 47, my mother then being 14 years old, they met this whole new family. So in this case, in this nice black and white picture, a little pixelated, we see Moshe in Tel Aviv with his new girlfriend or de facto wife, Ruth, and their two children, my late Aunt Maya and my Uncle Yossi here, looking like a sweet 12-year-old, and who's on this call with us. So what to make of this? So this was Moshe's third family, really. Like I said, his interactions with women were somewhat complicated. But the two families somewhat got along. I don't know exactly how they got along. This must have been the most difficult thing for these, women to meet each other and see what all was going on. Rose got an apartment a block or two away from Ruth and the children. Moshe was around, but little by little in the 1950s, he moved to, well, he opened a gallery in Sfat, or Safed in northern Israel. He's said to be one of the founders of the artists colony in Sfat, which is, a very exciting thing. In the era that I knew him in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, I knew him as a painter in Sfat who would occasionally come into Tel Aviv. And I'm sure Tzfat was lovely for him, but I'm sure it was a way also of getting away from all his family obligations to all these various women, children, and who knows what. I guess a sad footnote to the rest of his family was that in World War II, Moshe's parents, Shlomo and Shifra, perished. His sister Bluma perished, and his little brother Benny also perished. In Bluma's case, along with her husband and children. This was very sad, of course. Had Benny visited Palestine as well, had he stayed, he would have survived the war. Shlomo in his letters always talked about coming to America or getting together the money and the visa to come to America, in which case, perhaps he would have been able to do that before the war started. But for various reasons, everyone stayed in Europe, and other than Shlomo and Dora and Rose and my mother, the rest of the family perished in the war. I do have some further pictures of his post-war work. So in the artists' colony, Moshe turned almost entirely from photography to oil painting. And this is neither. It's a lithograph of something that might originally have been an oil painting, perhaps. But I can't speak to that. But this is a lithograph that's in my home. It says Jerusalem the Golden at the bottom. And also in pencil, a bit hard to see, it says for Jonathan and a few other words. I cannot quite read it. This is a water painting, watercolor. This one says, for Jonathan with my best wishes, Lashana Tova, and can't make out the year on it. Here he's changed his name again from Moï Ver and Moshe Vorobeichik to Moshe Raviv. The family lore says that David Ben-Gurion himself befriended Moshe and encouraged him to change his name to a more Hebrew-sounding name. I can't speak to that, but it's been a long-standing part of the family lore that he well knew David Ben-Gurion and other notables in the early founding of the State of Israel, and was quite friendly with them. So this was a watercolor, and this is me as perhaps a 4-year-old, give or take, 5-year-old, on an early visit to Israel. There's my grandfather telling me to look at the camera, which I was very obediently. And I think it's the summer based on my on what I'm wearing. And probably I was 4 because if I was much older, my brother Dan would also be in the picture. These were pictures that I took of my grandfather on a trip in the 1980s. And this was my effort at painting. He put me to work painting the walls of his studio, or the outside walls of the studio. So that was 1986 or so. And we went on a little walk, and I just like this picture very much. It's him being friendly with a couple of recent Ethiopian immigrants to Israel, all looking very sunny and enjoying the moment. And it's just a nice memory. And that, if I met him again after 1989, he was in decline at that time. On the BCC trip to Israel in 1999, he had recently passed away. It was 1995, and that was the first time that I saw his gravestone. So some of you that are on this call will remember me on the tour bus talking a little bit about the life of my grandfather. This is the much expanded version of that talk about his life 24 years later. And this is Moshe in the 1980s, courtesy of my cousins, Hedy and Noah. He's sitting under a tree. He looks very relaxed. And, he lived a good long life in Israel and was very happy with the times that certainly with the times that I visited him. I remember him as being, very happy with his career. He had several retrospectives over the years. I know that his art was shown in Boston and Montreal during his lifetime. I know in Germany more recently, and then Lithuania, and then the current exhibit in Paris. The Paris exhibit is moving to Warsaw in October, and it's moving to Tel Aviv in March of next year. So all of that by way of saying that his art, especially his photography, is earning much attention now that it didn't really get during his lifetime, and that's very heartening to see that. I would also say that there were scholars working in Germany and elsewhere in Europe that were trying to track down whatever happened to Moï Ver, and because these were pre-internet days, and because he did his Israeli art under the name Moshe Raviv, it took many, many years for people to find that he was alive and well and living in Israel. It was a surprise, I think, in the 1990s to various German scholars to find that he was living and that they could actually talk to him and his family in Israel. So that, folks, is a little bit about the life of my grandfather. And Rabbi, if you want to maybe chime in, let me know who has questions.
Yeah, so first, thank you so much, Jonathan. The pictures, the PowerPoint, the information, I want to know more about your family tree immediately. It's just such a fascinating story, his sort of personal life juxtaposed to his professional life, and just really fascinating. So anyone who has comments, questions, again, I know you have family members here. If they have other bits and pieces of story to offer, we welcome any and all. So either raise your actual hand or your Zoom hand, and I'll call on people one-on-one, one by one, and we can continue the conversation. Robin.
Okay, so I'm so glad I came. How did he support himself? I mean, was he that, with all this moving around, and was he that, excuse me, successful as an artist? Or did he have another way of making money? Or
so, Robin, great question. He was not, the family was not wealthy. They made their lives in Vilna, but in no way was it a wealthy family. Everything that he did was either with the help of Uncle Joe in Providence for example, going to the Bauhaus, I'm quite sure that was funded by Uncle Joe. Or he would use one project to get himself to a location that he wanted to go to. I like an example of that is that in the Paris exhibit, there's a whole series of pictures taken around Poland that I didn't know about previously. And the Polish pictures are pictures of, I would say, Zionist youth and young adults, or Jewish youth and young adults attending Zionist-oriented training camps out in the rural areas to get them ready, supposedly, for making Aliyah to Palestine. This would have been pre-war, 1930s. It reminded me very much of the summer camp that I went to in Nova Scotia, where they kind of also, ran it, semi-kibbutz style, as if the kids were all going to end up in making Aliyah. But you know what I'm saying? Why did he get himself to Poland? It would have been to visit with Rose and Lily. So he had some publisher or somebody support him in travel and getting there so he could take these pictures, but his motivation would be additionally to visit Rose and Lily. Wherever he went, he had some kind of a job that would take him there. I don't think his art was extremely successful. The studio was open to tourists. He would, he would see what kinds of things would sell. I was going to actually come back to that. But, every once in a while he would sell a painting for, a few hundred shekels. And I think little by little he was able to pay his rent. But I don't think he left an artistic legacy. He did not have a lot of money.
Thank you. Any other? Okay, we have a question in the chat. Didn't he also do a lot of, or a comment question, didn't he also do a lot of graphics for magazines, asks Rachel Weber.
Right, so absolutely. I left a few things out of this. There were several parts to his artistic career that somehow I thought I had in my PowerPoint, and it sort of disappeared into some other version of the presentation that I had. Yes, in the early days pre-State of Israel and into the State of Israel, before the settlement of the artists' colony in Sfat, he absolutely did a whole middle career in graphic design and posters. These were for various political parties in Israel, the Histadrut, and they were generally kind of they had kind of pioneer themes and labor themes. Yes, a lot of that. Sorry to not have them. You can, if you look up Moshe Raviv graphic design, graphic posters, or if Dan or anyone wants to put a link in the chat, there's a whole website with just the graphic design.
Any other questions or comments? There's so much to think through. It was such a well-done presentation, but just thinking about the personal versus the professional. Marie.
Yeah, I was just curious. You mentioned earlier about his feelings about Judaism and maybe conflicted issues within that. And then I was just curious if
Right.
you had any more about that.
I did mean to go back to that. Thank you. So as a young person, he had an extensive Jewish education, but his career choices were very much in a secular direction. Even when he takes pictures in Vilna, my sense is that he's a bit disconnected from his subjects, the subjects of the pictures. He's more like an archaeologist digging up an ancient culture. That's the sense that I get from those pictures. But then if you follow his career path in Israel, he becomes sort of he has a different attitude toward Judaism and what the Jewish people are all about. Suddenly his pictures, instead of elderly religious men and so on, suddenly he's got pictures of pretty young women and handsome looking people at the beach, and workers working on building a kibbutz. So like his whole, I guess it's not unique to him personally, but it seems like his view of what Judaism and Jewish culture are all about seem to change completely when he gets to Israel, in my opinion. I would also say that, Dan's going to do a screen share, Rabbi, if you'll let him. I was also going to say that in his later oil paintings, he often has inscriptions from the, oh yeah, that's great. He often has inscriptions from the Zohar, in other words, mystical Jewish writings. So he, whether he really, in some way, he was inspired by being in Tzfat and, being in kind of a center of Kabbalah. So he had some interest in Jewish themes for sure, but I can't really pull apart whether he really believed in Jewish mysticism, or if he, a cynic might say it helped sell a few paintings to American tourists. I think his views about Judaism were complicated.
Do you think that obviously moving to Israel created, just to piggyback on Marika's question, as you said, made a significant difference? Did he ever speak about the loss, the Holocaust, like how that might have also influenced his connection to Judaism, or just in general influenced him and his artistic or personal experience?
It's difficult to say. When he and I spoke, his English was not the best, so it would be some mix of broken French, my broken French and Hebrew. So, we had lots of talks about, he would show me around the city of Tzfat, but I don't remember a conversation with him where we talked about the loss of his family in the war. On the one hand, his Rose and Lily survived, but he lost all his siblings except his sister Dora and his parents, and must have been devastating. It's a good question, but I don't really know the answer to it. To answer the questions in the Zoom, for Avril, Joe would have been Moshe's uncle or Shlomo's brother, if you remember the picture of the big family at the table. Joe became a doctor in Providence, and that would be Rachel's grandfather. Yes, that's on the Zoom. And Peggy asked, no, unfortunately, that Paris family, we don't know any names or have any pictures of. If somehow there's a picture of them in the family archive, I mean the photographic archive, I haven't seen it, and I don't know if Yossi or any of the Israeli cousins have seen anything like that. My interest in DNA genealogy is very much interested in seeing if maybe I can pursue that part of the family.
Robin and then Marie again.
First of all, I loved the picture of you and your grandfather when you're 4 years old. You look so much like him with your head of hair. That's how you occurred to me in your face. I'm just wondering, are there any other artists in any media in the family?
Well, good question. Dan, who's on this call, my brother, is a bit of a photographer and has had some nice a variety of photographs published, astrophotography and travel photography, in particular. I can't think of
How
who
about
else.
me, Jonathan?
Amy, of course. Do you
Amy
want,
Kwadler here. I am the great granddaughter of Annie, who was Moy's aunt. So, and Jonathan found me a couple of years ago, because the crazy part of all of this is I always believed that my great grandmother Annie was an only child, never knowing that she had come from Belarus, and brother Shlomo and Joe and all these people. So it was really quite extraordinary when Jonathan found me on Facebook. And I have been a working photographer for over 40 years, and a jewelry artist, and based in my education was in Boston at Mass Art, and had 4 generations of Bostonians there, and then California, now Santa Fe.
wow. Now you're not Moshe's offspring, but that's quite something. Also, of course, his granddaughters in Israel are maintaining the archive, so that's that's a bit
So
of art.
cool.
And then
Yeah.
Rachel, do you want to say a bit about your art?
Hi everyone. So Joe was my grandfather, as you said, and Deborah, who's on this call as well, under my name. She didn't change her name. Joe is also her grandfather, and we are both artists. And I mostly work in multimedia printmaking at the moment.
Cool.
So there's a lot of artists in the family.
If there's an artistic gene, it would have to go back before Moshe to.
And my children are artists. The science gene skipped my family completely.
And cousin Debbie.
Cousin Debbie is on this call under
Oh,
my.
okay. Oh, we can't see you, but okay, got it.
I think
That's
she can pipe up here.
Hmm.
Debbie, are you there? Anyway, she's an artist.
Okay,
Lots of artists.
got it.
Marie.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I was just curious. I know that you mentioned a little bit about the family during the Holocaust, but I wasn't quite clear where he was. If he was in Israel in the 30s, he left Paris and then went to Israel and stayed there during the Holocaust.
Yes, he moved to Palestine, which then became Israel. Yes,
I get
he moved in 1934, well, 5 years before the start of the war.
Cool. Thanks.
We have just a few more minutes, but other questions, comments? Where can we see more of his work, perhaps? And if we aren't able to go to Paris or Warsaw or Tel Aviv in the next few months?
I think at this point, if you Google his name, I think Moï Ver is probably the best name to use, because there's another famous Moshe Raviv. Apparently, he was an Israeli ambassador of some sort. So I think if you Google Moï Ver photography, Moï Ver oil paintings, there's quite a bit.
Thank you. I'll
Absolutely.
get Googling after this, as I imagine many of us will. Any other memories? I mean, Jonathan, you talked a lot about, again, this sort of your perception of him and his work. I imagine at some point in your life, you sort of realized that, his work went beyond just, your family and the things that you knew that he did. I'm curious, and for any of, your brother, any of the other family members, what was it like to sort of discover this whole world and how he might have been revered in the art world and his connections to that as you got older?
Well, for me, really, really exciting to know that, someone who, who we knew only as a painter of oil paintings had this whole prior career, in fact, multiple careers, in different areas of art. I mean, he was remarkably creative in his photography, and the oil paintings were creative and showed his love of Israel and scenery and maybe Kabbalah here and there. But he has so many different interests, so many different creative ideas. And Dan suggested Yossi say a few words if he's on. I know it's quite late in Israel. Amy, the archive is under the control of Yossi and his two daughters, my cousins in Israel. They worked with the Pompidou to set up the exhibit that's currently traveling around Paris, Warsaw, and Tel Aviv. And, I never had a career in art, of course, but that cover slide that has the Moï Ver, c'est mon grand-père, I had to make each letter individually using triangles and parallelograms. There was no font online. I tried to mimic this font that they used on the cover of the Moï Ver book. So yeah.
Very impressive, Jonathan.
So it's fun, and it's lovely to have an opportunity to speak about his life.
Absolutely. Well, I want to, in our just last few moments, just thank everyone for being here. I love that we can share a little bit with Jonathan and the rest of your family who's here about your about your grandfather, excuse me, and hear all these interesting facets of his life. And again, the personal experience and the professional and how those things work together and the different spaces that he occupied throughout his life. So thank you so much for offering all of this, and I'm sure exciting all of us to do some Googling and find more images and learn more about all of the art of his life. If you are, again, interested in offering a lunch and learn yourself, please let me know. We'd be happy to have more people offer bits of interesting information, history, personal stories, professional things that you feel how you have an expertise in, and just grateful to have such amazing congregants who have so many things to offer here at BCC. So again, thank you all for being here. Really a pleasure to, and thank you so much, Jonathan. Really, it was incredible to learn more about your grandfather.
Thanks, Rabbi, for the suggestion, and thanks for sharing this, and thank you everybody for being here.